Welcome, everybody, to today's Globe Observer Connect conversation. It's great to see you all here. Just as a reminder, we are recording this session, so if you have any objection to being seen or heard, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I'll read them out, or Brian can read them as part of the conversation. So without further ado, I will give the floor over to Brian Campbell, who's going to lead the discussion about some of the latest updates in the Globe Observer app related to trees. So Brian, all yours.
All right. Thank you, Holly. And yeah, thank you for everyone coming in here. I see we have folks from all over the Globe community. So it's great to see. So thank you all for being here. So yeah, I'm going to start off by saying there's some really cool updates that we have in the Globe Observer Trees tool. And it's basically you asked for it and we delivered because a lot of folks, all over the Globe community have been looking, in the past for how can you also identify include the identification of the tree, the genus and species of the tree, or the common name, because as and you might have seen in the blog, which I put in the chat, the blog link, you know, knowing what type of tree it is plays an important role with folks doing research, whether it's student research or professional research. The tree has, every type of tree species has different characteristics. They have different ecological roles, and different trees need different care if they happen to be ones that are kind of domesticated in your yard. But it also, identifying the trees helps us determine if trees are an invasive species. I was just talking before about Holly asked if some of the trees in our area in Maryland were blooming yet, and I said yes, some of the Bradford pear trees were blooming, which they're the ones here are gorgeous white flowering blossom, but it's an invasive species, and it basically it chokes out a lot of the healthier plants that are around it. And it's not a very resilient tree, but people plant it because it's one of these trees that's really beautiful, has a beautiful bloom in the springtime. But back to Globe Observer, when we talk about the tree genus and species and identification, plays such a vital role. Environmentally plays a role. Economical, environmentally, impacting human health. Invasive species. Quick story here before I go any further is that several years ago we had a group from Croatia, a student group in Croatia, where they were, and I don't remember the exact town because it's been maybe 5-6 years since they've done it, but I have to look it up. It's probably in one of the IVSS program research projects from way back, maybe 2018, 2019, where they identified some invasive species in a park that was basically releasing some spores that were causing some respiratory issues in people who were visiting the park who noticed this, and they were able to go and identify these species of tree, and then get that information to the local environmental groups, the city planners, and things like that, to determine what these were, and then basically had them eradicated. So, this was, like I said, maybe 5-6 years ago. I don't remember, but I remember the story at one point. So that's just an example of one of the reasons why we included this now in here. And then also on the blog, one of the most important things that you have to realize is that the Globe Observer doesn't identify the tree for you. It's not, like some of the other apps which are recommended here in the blog, like iNaturalist or Seek by iNaturalist and Tree Snap. Those are some really, really great apps to use to be able to identify the tree. And then when you do that, you can add that to your tree height observation. And I should mention, doing the genus and species identification, it is an optional measurement. We'd love for you to do it because, specifically, it's been a big ask for groups like the European Phenology Campaign for Globe, because they do their spring green up and fall green down campaigns every year. And a lot of those folks want to know, well, what the tree genus and species are. We have a big group in Latin American Caribbean, the Trees Within LAC, which they really work to identify as many trees, genus and species or common names as possible, for their research as well. So, that's one of the big things why we did this, because, one, looking at the environmental impacts of the genus and species, but then also, having that data in the database for students to use in their research, and even, professional research or scientists to use in their identification as well and in their research. So, I mean, that basically, is kind of it in a nutshell about what we did. We added these to the Globe Observer, and we have recommended apps in the blog that I wrote, to help you with this. So I think, that's a half decent synopsis of what we want to, talk about today. I could go on forever, but I will not because we're limited. But yeah. So any discussion, and I also want to mention that, and I don't want to put him on the spot right now, but I see Marcus Euster is here from Globe Switzerland, and I know he has used. I'm not sure if he used he's used a bunch of apps where he's done some great identifications, and he may have some other apps that are great that he's used over time because he's given presentations as part of the Trees Around the Globe student research campaign. I think he's been written up in like some star stories as well, where he's been working with students for years to identify, like bud burst and identify things, leaf snap, tree snap, things like that. So Marcus, anytime you like, feel free to pop in and maybe if you have any recommendations for things that you use that's really successful. So are there any questions or comments or any type of discussion points that anybody wants to bring forth? Or has anybody actually done this so far? Have you, in your observations of tree height, have you added the genus and species or the common name?
Could you maybe step us through how you might use a different app like iNaturalist or some of the others you
Sure.
named to identify the genus and species, and how that works with Globe Observer for, if I'm somebody who has never made an observation in outside of Observer, how would you do that? Are they
Right.
connected? Like, how does that all work?
So yeah, so I mean, it's a right now they're separate apps, that you have on your device, and I the one I use the most is Seek by iNaturalist, and it's been a really good, and it's super simple because basically you go in, you create an account basically like Globe Observer with your email, and then you get an email back saying, hey, you're ready to go, you have an account. And then you go in there, and it's basically, it says, take an observation. I don't remember. Sorry, I don't remember exactly. I can actually look. I should look on my phone. But what it says is you click on a button, and it basically opens up your camera. First time you have to allow the app to use your camera, and you basically get as close to the object, the tree or the leaf, and it can identify. You want to really look at get as close to it as you can. Like a leaf is really like kind of the best if that's leaves on it. It's a little harder in the wintertime to identify it by just like shooting at the bark and branches because it's a little trickier, but when you have, maybe it's a flowering tree with bud burst or something like that, uh, uh, Seek is really good at identifying, it via the, just the buds. And then also, the leaves are, as I mentioned, leaves are like super important. So, you will probably have to have, you'll have both apps open if you don't know. I mean, there's a lot of folks out there who do identify. They're really good at identifying, but I'm assuming like the majority of folks out there, we don't all have the Latin genus and species names, in our brain for every tree that we're looking at. There are some folks out there that probably do, but some of the hardcore experts, but yeah. So and also the same thing with like iNaturalist as well. It's usually a quick identifier. It has a really good, accuracy rate. And I did see something that I couldn't find. I was going to look for it, but I couldn't find it. But there are things online where people, rank the accuracy of some of these apps. And I should also mention something that's really cool with Seek by iNaturalist. If when you submit it to their database, you can go back and look at everything that you've looked at. So if you want to go back and measure the same tree, but you forget what the tree genus and species is, you can then go back into Seek, and because it'll break it down by like tree, invertebrate, animal, vertebrate, flowers, all the way down. You can break it apart like that. But what's cool about it is once it goes into the database, anybody can see your picture and your identification, and people go in and actively add to it. If the experts are in there, they add information about what you just took an observation of, which is really cool. For instance, maybe Seek will just give you, I don't know, but I've seen it give genus and species, but let's say it just gives genus. Somebody will go in there and say, oh, the species of this is, and they will add it to the database with your observation, which is really, really cool. And you can access that data anytime, just through the app on your phone. And you can do it on your desktop as well if you have an account.
So Joseph had a good follow-up question in the chat. Hang on, let me scroll to it. But essentially, is the iNaturalist data connected to Globe data in any way, or how do you make that connection?
So honestly, I know we want to have it seamlessly correct? We would love to have that, but yeah, I mean, it's a matter of, yeah, honestly, maybe Kristen or Holly, you have the better answer to that question because I don't have it linked directly with mine.
Yeah, so I would say that there's not a direct link in the sense that you have to do the observation and the identification in iNaturalist, and then you have to put that information into Globe Observer. So someone could take data from both iNaturalist and Globe Observer and use it in research, but you have to make the connection manually in terms of putting in the information. I think the reverse could also be true. You could do a Globe trees observation and get the tree height, and then add that information to your iNaturalist observation, because the iNaturalist, this is an oak tree that happens to be 20 meters tall. So there's not, you have to do the connection manually, but there are ways that they complement each other, but they're not automatically connected.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. Yeah, and that's true with tree snaps and Seek as well. But then also, that's why it's a good reason to keep, when you're doing a tree height observation and you want to do the identification of the tree genus and species, make sure you keep the other app open as well, because if you want to do that, you don't want to mistakenly submit your Globe tree height data to the Globe database and forget to do add that. So that's what we recommend for that. Yeah, as Kristen mentioned, it's not seamlessly attached. You have to have both things open and do it manually.
Right. Joseph had a really great comment as well in the chat saying that somebody could use AI and create a merged database. And that's absolutely true. Both iNaturalist and Globe have free and open databases. We have an AI tool that you can use to easily automate that data pull. And I haven't played around with iNaturalist data myself recently, but I believe they do as well. So I think that is absolutely something that could happen if a researcher who wanted to merge that data separately, as long as there are observations that are aligned to each other in both databases. That is probably going to be the tricky part.
That'd be a really cool student project.
I think so. Yeah.
Do that AI, do the AI merging. Yeah.
Another suggestion, Brian, that I'm seeing is that somebody wondered if you could show your screen and show how you enter that stuff in the Observer app, that information in the Observer app.
Oh, show my phone?
I'm sorry.
Or just
yes, your phone screen, your app screen, if that's feasible, or
I can bring the blog up if necessary because there's screenshots on there.
Okay.
So
yeah, that might be the easiest thing to do. I'll let you do that.
Okay, let me do that because I have that window open right now. So let me go ahead and share that. All right, so here is you can see that, Holly, that looks okay?
Yes, that looks great. Thank you.
Awesome. So, okay, so yeah, so here's a blog, Globe Observer Treats. It's got even better. So I'm going to scroll down here and I'll make this a little bigger here. So what you'll notice, and I'll go through some of the differences what you'll see, because before we added the optional genus and species, we have the we have the optional enter circumference, and now we've added this field to it as well. So when you click on this, you will get this second screen here where you enter the Latin name, and if you happen, like I said before, if you happen to know it, you can enter it in here. But what you can do is when you if you are if you know this, if you use another app, or if you know it, use another app to find this or not, you can just start typing in the Latin name for the genus here, as well. And then it'll start populating what we have in the database. And then what you can do then for the species as well, you can start typing that in, and then it will uh, show this. And there is a rare instance that it might not be in the database, and that's where you can send that information to us via the app, saying that this needs to be added in here. But we have a pretty robust database of these Latin genus and species names. So yeah, so you basically go in, and after you're done, counting your steps to your observation point to the base of the tree. Okay, then you'll get you'll get to this optional circumference one and the optional genus and species. Then you can just click on that enter genus and species. And like I said, then you'll get this where you can populate this as well. And this is when it's a good idea to have your other app open, or you may just want to identify that tree before you do the tree height observation, so you have it open and ready to go, and you can flip to that one real fast and take a look at the name of it, and then start typing it in Globe Observer. And then also you can also enter a common name, and then it says source of genus and species. You can we'd like to know like where you got that information from, so it'll ask you, did you identify it via an app like Seek or iNaturalist or TreeSnap, or is it just personal knowledge? All about this tree. So yeah, so I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's pretty easy to do, and it's just as simple as that. And here is just an example of some of the screenshots from these three apps that were recommended. And these aren't the only ones you can use. I mean, these are just ones that seem to be the most popular, have a really high accuracy of identifying correctly. So, for instance, these are some of the ones that I've done. One happens to be, we have a lot of crepe myrtle trees in our area. And I think it might be like one of the Maryland state trees or something. I'm not sure. But yeah, so this identified iNaturalist identified it as a crepe myrtle and where it's located. And then the Seek app, this actually happens to be in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, outside a hotel, because I didn't know what this cedar tree was. So I wanted to do identification. You can see here an Atlas cedar, and then it gives the genus and species right underneath it. And then TreeSnap, these are all the ones, you can observe via TreeSnap. So there's a nice picture associated with it. And then the common name, and then like American chestnut, and then the genus and species, that Castanea dentata. And so, yeah, so these apps are, super good to use, but there may be others out there that, that you may use that you think is better. So
I think I want to emphasize the point you just made, Brian, and that's when you are typing that genus and species name into the Globe Observer app. We don't have an exhaustive list of every genus and species that exists. We have many, but not all. So if there's something that you have found, you've observed, it's not there, you can click that little question mark down in the lower right corner, and that gets you an email to us. And you just just let us know, I was observing this. Here's the genus and species that I looked at. It's not in your database, and that is sufficient. So that's how you reach out to us to give us or to tell us about that information. Is there any other way you would have people share that with us, Brian?
I think that's the best way to do it. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that's probably the fastest way if you do it directly from the app. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you. I was just
I'm sorry. Zoom has just been weird today. So.
It's fine. Though we don't see you. Your camera seems to be off.
Yeah, it disappeared.
Which is fine. I think Trees also has a field notes section.
Yeah.
You could enter that information into as well. It just is stored in a different part of the database, so it's not as easy to retrieve. But it is a way to associate that information with the observation that you're making at the time.
Yeah, you'll get that when you get the tree height, when you're on that tree height screen at the end, right before you submit, where it asks you if all that stuff is right. It's usually like a yellow box before you submit it. But then there's the blank box at the end for comments, and that's a good place to put that metadata in there that'll be associated with that observation in the database. So, but yeah, that's a good idea. to do that as well. Because often, for instance, when we ran the moon trees quest several years ago, we had people put that, that it was a moon tree in the comment section, or it was an Apollo 14 moon tree in the comment section. So then when we go to look at it in the database, whether it's, looking it up on ADAT, we get that spreadsheet and we can see that in there, so we can track what that data, what that extra metadata is, as part of the observation, which is super important, which is something that, folks at, including student researchers and scientists, they like that data. The more data you have for an observation, the better. Just numbers isn't always the best. It's good to have all that other information. Hence why we added the genus and species and or common name to the app, to the tool.
Right. I have some more questions, but I want to pause and see if anybody else has questions first.
Is Marcus? Yeah, Marcus is still on.
Yes.
Hey.
Does it work?
Yep, I hear you, Marcus. So yeah, so I know I mentioned earlier that you have been doing a lot of identification with some tools like identifying leaves and things during bud burst. Have you found anything that works really well on your end as far as identification of trees?
I think the apps you mentioned, they are all very, very well usable.
Okay.
And we observe the trees around our school, and I do it for years, and so I know all of them. And I have I have a lot of books to look them up, and the difficult ones are only the ones that are not from here, the invasive species.
Yeah, that's a good point that you brought up, and Kristen just held up the book. That's another, there are those guides, the actual physical plant and tree guides that you can use, and I'm pretty sure, for in most places you can buy them, for a region as well. So, I mean, they have long exhaustive books, but there's also ones that are, specific region. I know there's one, the trees of Maryland or the trees of Virginia, and there's ones, the trees of the United States, the trees of North America. So it goes from, state all the way up through regions. So, but yeah, that's also a possibility if you want to use that kind of what they call doing a little old school, which is great. Thank you, Marcus.
So Marcus, that brings me to the question that I had, which is, you talk about the challenge being identifying invasive species because they're not ones that are familiar to you, or perhaps not in your book of trees of the region. And I think that sounds like a really great project for somebody to do now that you have the ability to enter genus and species. You can track an invasive species, or I was just wondering if folks here have any other ideas for projects that either a student or a community might do now that they're able to track genus and species using Globe Observer. And so it's not just Brian, but anybody who wants to comment would be welcome.
Well, I have a thought. We were talking about the flowering trees earlier, and I think that is something that if you can identify the species of flowering tree and whether they're a native flowering species or sort of one that was brought in. I know here in the DC area, we have sort of the famous cherry blossoms, but I don't know that they're native to this area. I think there are some native flowering trees, but the famous cherry trees down in DC that all the tourists flock to, those are not necessarily native. So I think that's an interesting one to think about, being able to observe and I think Brian was mentioning the Bradford pears earlier, which are also, I believe, not a native species to here. But I think things like dogwood and redbud are ones that are native species. So this time of year, I love seeing all the flowers and the flowering trees coming out. So that's one idea.
Anyone else?
I know I had recently talked to somebody in a community who was interested in mapping the locations of fruit trees because they were looking for, they were doing a project where they were looking for urban food, where urban gardens and things like that are. And so I thought that was kind of a cool thing that you might track with this. All right, Brian, one more question in the comment or in the chat is, are there other comments that are especially useful to add to the field notes?
Yeah, I mean everything from because when you do the tree height observation, you do get a latitude and longitude, but if you've done the land cover tool, you can take like I think it's like I forget what's the name of the picture, but it's like a special picture that you can take in that area. So I mean, you can't do that with the trees tool, but something that you identify is like where you are. Maybe you're on outside of a school, or you're on the campus of a university, or you're in a densely wooded area. And I mentioned densely wooded area because it's pretty tricky with the trees tool to measure every individual tree in a highly dense wooded area, because as you have to be able to see the top of the tree and the bottom of the tree from your observation point, and be able to walk to that tree in a straight line with no obstacles. And it's good to, and the reason I mentioned that also is because we have scientists who are using satellites like the Ice Cloud and Land Elevation Satellite 2, or ICET 2, but also the Global Ecosystem Dynamics Investigation, or the JEDI instrument on the International Space Station, to measure trees across the planet from space. And a lot of those satellites are able to measure like the height, the canopy tops of these thicker forests as well. So to have in the field notes where you are, if you for instance, if this is like your 10th, 12th, 20th measurement of this tree, that might be good to have as well, because looking at that change of tree over time is super important as well, because that changes how much over time, how much carbon the tree has pulled in from the atmosphere, how much oxygen it's created for us, based upon how big it's getting, what its crown size is, things like that. So there's lots of really cool metadata that you can put in there. I like to put in there, like if I happen to be like at like the NASA Wallace Flight Facility, like we're out measuring trees, I'll put in this is part of a this specific school group visit that we've done. So just as much information as you can include in that, because not everybody wants to really like have to plug in the latitude and longitude to find out exactly where that point is. So maybe that's kind of helpful for people looking into that data, that if you have like where you are taking that data.
Thanks, Brian. Who's saying context matters? So tell us the
Yeah,
context.
for sure.
All right, well, that brings us to 12:30. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you for leading our conversation today, Brian.
Sure.
Our next Globe Observer Connect is on April 10th at 8 p.m. And that conversation will be about the beginning of mosquito season and where to start looking for mosquitoes, and why it's important to track the beginning of the season. We'll also be talking to Emma Giles from SciStarter, because April is Citizen Science Month, and we are participating through SciStarter in a initiative called Million Acts of Science. And so they're trying to challenge the citizen science community at large to do a million things, take a million observations during the month, and your globe observations can count towards that. So we have a blog post on our website about it right now. You can go read up on it right away, and then join us for the conversation on April 10th. So you will see that event and registration link on our website here soon. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll hope to see you again next time. Thanks.